G'day, I'm Mark from Self-Sufficient Me, and it's a hot, windy day here in sunny southeast Queensland. And to make matters worse, I was doing some weeding down the back over here near a pepper plant. When I was weeding around that pepper plant, I disturbed a nest of paper wasps, and one stung me right between the forehead here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's come up in a bit of a lump. In fact, yesterday my head looked a little bit like Frankenstein with my swollen head and swollen forehead, but it's recovered a little bit. I went to bed at 6:30 last night, slept for a good 12 hours, took some pain relief, and yeah, I'm still feeling a bit queasy because the poison has affected my head, my eyes, my neck, and yeah, it's put me in a pretty bad way for a couple of days. So if I sound a little under the weather, it's because I am. But I still want to pump this video out for you guys because, you know, let's just get into it. I looked through the archive and I found that I didn't have any specific videos on the piping that goes around these garden beds. But I do have some old footage that I took several years ago. And I'll start by saying, if you want to put in this type of irrigation system around your garden beds, it's not that hard to do. It's actually very easy. It's almost like connecting your Lego pieces together and then connecting it up to your house tap and fire away, you know. It's pretty simple. So let's start with the front garden here. It's a little bit messy, there's a few weeds here and there, but essentially in the front of the garden, these are my oldest raised beds, and the wood here probably needs changing, to be honest. But anyway, you can see that the piping on this one has been taken down and folded up, and that's because I really no longer use. So essentially there was two reasons why I stopped using our piped 13mm pipe irrigation system around our garden beds. The first one was because it just was hard to maintain. You had to constantly keep unblocking the risers or the sprinkling systems, and that became a pain after a while, so it wasn't watering all the garden beds correctly. And the other thing was, when I expanded my beds and put some more down the back here, the more length you put into these sprinkler systems, the more pressure's needed to pump that water out at a rate that will make it water all the beds at the same time and at the same level. So what I ended up having to do was put a tap on the system. That was an easy fix. So you'd turn that tap on and off, and then that would regulate watering several beds, and then turn that off and it would stop the water in those beds and allow the water flow to go to the other beds, which was sort of a fix, but then it was a bit of a pain because you had to keep remembering to turn that tap on and off, so it wasn't as automated as I would have liked. But having said that, the 13mm pipe system, well, that's what we get in Australia, 13mm piping, irrigation piping. They sell it in 15 or 30 or 100 metre lengths, and you just cut that to size and you use all the little joints involved, and you can buy all separate waterers and risers and different watering systems to plug into this piping. It's very easy to assemble. So here's a little bit of me in the past explaining the 13mm piping system on how I piped it into our small nursery and used it for our nursery plants. What I'm doing here is setting up a overhead watering system. I've put in some 13mm irrigation piping. It's really cheap as, and just a few connections. I've got some little, let's get one out, overhead watering sprinklers here. Just these tiny things, and there's a thread on the end, and all they do is they screw into that irrigation piping. The only thing you have to do is poke a little hole with one of these hole punches. You can get plenty of different designs of them, and you just poke a hole into the plastic piping, and then you pop this in, and Bob's your Arnie. There's one I've put in earlier, screwed in, and what I'm going to do is put another one in about a foot along. Now it doesn't really matter how far they're apart. When you start the sprinkler system up, you'll be able to test and see if you've got enough little mini sprinklers set up, and if your seedlings and all the space is getting watered. If you find gaps in the area that's not getting any water, well, it's simply a matter of putting another little sprinkler head in. First thing I do is punch the hole in. Make sure you guys can see it. There you go. Punch that in there like that. Then you grab your little sprinkler head, poke it in there up to the thread, and then just screw it. And just screw it till it's all the way in, and it'll stop. Doesn't have to be real tight screwed in, because this is just going to come out anyway. The way these type of systems work is when the water rushes past, it obviously gets to the end, gets some resistance. Don't normally get any leakage out of the sides here. It normally comes out the fastest way possible, and it'll find that exit here. So you don't have to worry about leakage from there anyway. Instead of using your fingers like me, you can screw it in with this thing, or screw it off, whichever may be. Right, so there's the watering system. I haven't finished putting them all in yet, but this is just to show you. So it goes up all around the top of this little greenhouse that I made. Rightio, so this hose here runs down around the back of my tank to my little seedling area which I was just talking about. But what I also want to do is, at the same time my seedlings are getting watered, I want to water my pots that I've got placed hanging on my water tank. But to do that, I've got to make the hose go left. So I'm going to use this T-bar, which is this. You can get all these sorts of connections to manipulate your pipe and go where you want it to go. Like this is an L joint. If you want to make it go obviously that way or that way, if you need to make it go up the side of a garden bed and then across, that way you don't get kinks in your hose. And here's just a normal straight flow. So if you want to join two pieces of irrigation hose together, and finally a stop. This just goes at the end of the hose. You can get little clips that once you've placed this on the hose that go around it to hold it on tighter. I would just push it on the hose and leave it at that. But that's when you've finished your job. You want to push it on the end of the irrigation hose, and that creates obviously the pressure to pump out through all your little sprinkler systems. These are about 25 cents each or something. I mean, you know, pretty cheap. Cut the pipe off, work one end in, and these things just push on. You don't have to hold them on with clips. It takes a bit of force. Essentially that's it for the cut you made. Now the other side. Push on like that. And I'll bend this up so that it comes up for my new hose that I'm going to put on. Alright, let's crank this baby up and see what it looks like. it's pretty windy and you're going to get that blow around. You can get other types of fixtures that can go directly into pots. Fill your boots, put whatever fittings and sprinkler systems you want. This one is effective for me. And all that's needed is it to come on at the right times. See, the mist is doing its job. It doesn't take much, that's why I only have mine for 5 minutes. 5 minutes, all this is all wet through. So for a small nursery garden, the 13mm piping system might be fine. Whack it on a timer, a couple of garden beds, and your watering's away, and it's pretty easy to maintain. If one of two of the risers clog up, you unclog them. It's not a major issue. For a larger vegetable garden like this, when you've got 20, 50 risers and you're constantly going around trying to unplug them, it takes time and effort, and then you get ants in the system, and well, then at the end of the day it starts to become too complicated and too much effort and time to maintain it, and then nothing works properly. And I know some of you are going to say, well, what about putting a filter on the system to stop it getting clogged up? And I do, and we did have a filter here. There's a filter, and regardless of the filter, you're still gonna get some clogged up risers. And like I said, if your garden's big, you're gonna have more than one or two, and it's gonna start becoming an effort because you've got to unscrew the risers, and as you unscrew your system to poke out and get rid of the gunk in the riser that's caused the blockage, well, then you're making the riser and the sprinkling system weak in one spot, and then it gets a leak and it just compounds the problem. So you're also going to say, well, what about soaker hoses? Aren't they a better way or a more progressive way, because you're saving water and it's underneath the mulch and the hose is in the garden bed? What do you think of them? Well, to be honest, we use soaker hoses quite a lot, and I'm not a real huge fan of them. Again, if you look at this system here, this was our old tomato trellis. We used to grow lots of tomato plants in here. Again, this is something that this year I'm going to build up and make into a gourd tunnel. And cucumbers and gourds and pumpkins is what I want to grow in here. And maybe, yes, some tomatoes and other stuff, but that's another story. But here used to be hooked up to, this is also a filter and a reducer. So when you're using a standard watering system and you're going to hook up a soaker hose to it, what you want to have is a reducer, a pressure reducer. Because if you have a normal mains or a normal pump system and you're using a soaker hose where the water just drips out of the hose and soaks into the garden bed, well, then high pressure could burst the hose, or it makes the water come out too fast and it doesn't work effectively. So for those reasons, you should put in a reducer. And that used to be hooked into a soaker hose that run along these thin beds. And the reason why I kept the beds quite thin was because when you put the soaker hose up this whole 16 or so meters, and then when it dripped out from the center, it would water all the bed, because if I was planting lettuce and other things in there, the problem with soaker hoses is they're very direct. And unless you leave it on for a really, really long time, it's not gonna wet your whole bed. So you either have to have all this hose zigzagging across your bed to cover all your plants, or you just have a small row where you can try to cover, and even that wasn't working that well. I found the soaker hose got clogged too. The soaker hose had its own issues, so I just didn't find it that effective. Again, big garden bed, big tunnel, perhaps a smaller garden bed, and a small garden, that's fine to use soaker hoses. Like I'm not saying these are bad systems. I'm just saying that I don't use them anymore because I just didn't find them effective enough. So what do I use now to water our whole vegetable garden? Well, you might be shocked and surprised, A, at how easy it is, and B, you mightn't like it. You might think that it's quite primitive, wastes too much water. You might be a water conservative. Well, I'm not. And what I use is one single impact sprinkler. This here. It's hooked up to a hose. I can pull this off and pull it out and water fruit trees if I need to, are in the orchard, water them by hand. I'll get to other ways that we water these in a minute, but yes, we can use an impact sprinkler in there as well to water the orchard, but we generally don't water the fruit trees that much. We might hand water occasionally, and that's why I can click this. But this one sprinkler here practically does the whole vegetable garden, and it also reaches my little seedling area here and a few plants near the irrigation pump that I haven't planted yet that gets watered at the same time. My old nursery that's sitting here isn't used at the moment because I haven't got that many plants on the go, but that impact sprinkler won't reach there, but I still have the makings from my old system that I showed you in here. So if I want to use that and arc that one up again, I can. The meantime, I'm just using this little nursery here for my plants, and I find that suffice. Here's some chilies on the go. And you saw my other video on the passion fruits that we planted out here, down the back there. And that does the job. I still have my old drip watering system from our irrigator. Now that never worked off the pump at all. That's its own pump, and it's worked off a solar system, and the batteries are still fine and everything, but the pump actually doesn't work anymore. So that was plumbed down into the tank just with a hanging 4mm cord, and it sucked up water and it drip fed our seedlings in here. And also we had some pot plants up there. I think from memory we grew some eggplants quite successfully against the tank using that irrigator system. If you want to know more about that irrigator system, I have done a video on that specifically, and have a look at that up there, and I'll put a link in the description. However, my enthusiasm for this irrigator pump in that video is a little bit, how we say, probably overzealous, because I wouldn't recommend anyone buy that irrigator system at all. For us, it worked good for about 12 months and then it failed. And when I contacted the manufacturer of irrigator, he said that, well, they're prone to fail after around 12 months. And in a way, they're not designed to fail, but they don't last more than 12 months. So I was a bit shocked to hear that. And but he said, what you can do is you can buy the internal pump and just replace that part for $40. And I wasn't prepared to be paying $40 every year just to replace the little pump thing in that, especially for an item that cost $100 and something bucks. So I haven't got rid of it yet, but we don't use it, and I haven't replaced the internal pump. So for that reason, I wouldn't recommend it. Otherwise, besides that, it actually did work quite well just off solar, because the reason why I was using that to water the seedlings was because I often turn the pump off, our electric pump, because it cycles through occasionally, you know, maybe 50 times a day to get back up to pressure. And to save electricity, I used to leave the pump off and only put it on when we're doing some watering. And that's another reason why my watering system sort of became redundant, because I got into the habit of hand watering or just using our impact sprinkler. And the reason why I like hand watering while I'm on it is because when you walk around your vegetable garden and water by hand every day, you inspect it at the same time. Apologies for the wind, guys. I understand that it's annoying. Poor video isn't too bad, but poor audio isn't something anyone likes. But there's not a lot I can do about it. It's blowing a gale and the wind is quite hot too. But yeah, if you are hand watering and you do have the capacity to hand water every day, I think it's good. It's good exercise to walk around. At the same time you're watering your plants, you're also looking for any disease, pests and that type of thing, and you can take action straight away. If you automate your system, sometimes you're not looking at the plants for a week and you can miss things. So that's another reason why I generally do hand water. But the impact sprinkler that I use really is handy. It's a one thing. When the impact sprinkler has it or breaks down, all I have to do is unscrew it and put a new impact sprinkler on it, or fix it up or whatever. It doesn't clog up because it's a large opening, and very little goes wrong with those things. But the thing is, it wastes a fair bit of water, especially if you're watering things you don't want. In our case, our pathways around the vegetable garden, most of them are grass, so I don't mind this getting watered. In fact, I want it to get watered. I like the grass around here. It keeps the heat down, it keeps the radiant heat down, and that's why I don't mind the impact sprinkler missing the vegetable garden, well, getting the vegetable garden, but also getting the grass around it, and some fruit trees on the left-hand side, and our little nursery here and all that. So that's why I like using an impact sprinkler, even though that might not be practical for a lot of you guys. If you've got smaller gardens or whatever, you might find that these other watering systems that I've described are better for you. Right, let's move across into the orchard, and I'll just finish up by showing you guys how we water some of the trees using our eco system here. Now this system that we've got here in the middle of our vegetable garden is actually, when we first got here, this trellis at the front here that I'm going to rebuild, that was already here. I didn't have the garden bed in, but this was already up. There was no plants or anything on it, so initially we grew passion fruit on here, and they grew quite well. And the reason why they had this trellis up was because it hid the septic system, which is right smack bang in the middle of our property. But anyway, we ended up building the vegetable garden centrally because it got the most sunlight and it was the most appropriate place to put it. So these concrete tubs and concrete tanks got hidden by the vegetable garden anyway. So what they do is all our wastewater that comes from the house, you know, from the shower, the bath, the laundry, doing our washing, the dishwasher, the toilet, all the wastewater goes in here. It gets sterilised or with chlorine, and it gets filtered, and it gets thrown into the wastewater tank, and all the solids go to the other tank, and they get sucked out about every 8 years or so. It works very efficiently. It gets tested and also serviced every quarter. And then that water that gets filtered and gets piped out from the system, it's actually quite clean. It gets piped out. The only reason I've got that up here is because I did some mowing and I just got it out of the way. But it goes up to here and it gets pumped out onto this hose, and I've extended this hose and it works really well. And I can meet just about every fruit tree in our orchard with this hose here. And here's our little friendly pepper plant with the wasp nest, which I've got to take care of. Yeah, you can't see it just here, but I'm going to get you. But yeah, so the water just gets pumped out onto the fruit trees and it's totally movable. And the water is full of nitrogen, and I know that because after the fruit trees, we usually leave it in the one position for about a week at a time. The grass grows really long and green and lush, and the fruit trees really get a good lush growth on them. And it's quite handy to have that extra free water, especially when summer's here and the dry weather, and that extra free sort of fertilizer water helps as well. It's totally safe, especially if you could use it on your vegetable garden, but it's not recommended to use septic water around vegetables. Not at all. Even the treated septic water like ours shouldn't be used around vegetables because you can get E. coli, other types of bacteria, if you're unlucky, get onto the vegetables and the salad crops in particular, and get taken up by them. So, but on fruit trees, that's fine, you know, as long as the sprinkler's not sprinkling up onto the fruit and then you eat the fruit without washing it. That'd be silly. But generally, the sprinkler just sprinkles around the root system and it doesn't harm any of the fruit or anything like that. So there's no problems there. It's just an excellent way, a supplementary way to get water into the garden and onto the fruit trees without having to use your own supplies. All right, well that's it. I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope it answered questions that many of you were wondering. If it did, give it a big thumbs up. Also, don't forget to share the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And now I've got a little bit of revenge business to take care of. So I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye for now.